Martin Luther King once said, "The labor movement was the principal force that transformed misery and despair into hope and progress." Since they were first formed in response to the effects of the Industrial Revolution, labor unions in the United States have been an effective way to unite workers and defend their rights. Specifically, unions have given workers a seat at the table and a voice to demand dignity and respect from their employers. However, from 1973 to 2007, union membership within the private sector of the United States has substantially decreased by 26% for men and 10% for women. With this same period of decline, hourly wage inequality increased by over 40%, indicating a relationship between the two. Although full unionization may never completely return given the increase in automation and globalization, the decline of unions and its impact on wage inequality is the most important poverty-related issue that is neglected because unions are a pathway to economic security for the working poor. People should care about this topic because of unions' cultural, political, and institutional effects that further norms of equity within unionized and non-unionized regions and industries. To understand and address the causes and consequences of poverty and inequality, it is crucial to recognize that the decline of unions both contributes to poverty and coincides with increasing wage inequality in order to effectively address the situation. Created in response to the social and economic impacts of the Industrial Revolution, labor unions formed to protect and defend workers' rights and interests. In 1834, in Lowell, Massachusetts, the first turnout of girls protesting wage cuts was one of the earliest efforts of organizing a union in the United States. Additionally, in 1877, there was a national uprising of railroad workers, and in 1869, the Colored National Labor Union formed. Since these instances, organized labor movements have contributed to improve both women's, immigrants, and minorities' rights. The National Labor Relations Act of 1935 is the primary law which gives U.S. unions rights, meaning it protects the rights of workers and employers, encourages collective bargaining, and lessens the specific practices of management that harm welfare. Through the work of labor unions, workers have been able to attain higher wages, safer working conditions, more reasonable hours, health benefits, and support for those workers who have retired or been injured. According to the research conducted by Bruce Western and Jake Rosenfeld, unions have cultural, political, and institutional effects that serve to materialize labor market norms of equity. Culturally, the work of labor unions brings to light issues of economic inequality through public speech. Specifically, Walter Reuther's leadership of United Auto Workers created a language of social solidarity and public discourse within firms, in forming a network of organizations that placed pressure on political leaders, like Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. The evidence for political effects of labor movements is seen through many policies that have been passed to protect workers with the help of union support. For example, the Equal Pay Act of 1963 that bans wage discrimination based on gender, and the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970 that protects the safety of workers were both implemented with the support of unions. Historical evidence for institutional effects of unions is evident in that unions were national economic actors who shaped and centralized wage policy when there was significant membership. Specifically, in the 1970s, President Johnson developed a policy that established industry wage and price guidelines alongside a labor union. Due to their wide range of influences and effects, labor unions can effectively defend and improve the lives of workers. While union membership is substantially decreasing in the United States, income and wage inequality are increasing, indicating a relationship between the two variables. According to scholars Henry Farber and Bruce Western, the decline in unions in the 1980s was caused by changes in the U.S. economy, heightened political discourse within the workplace, and major growth in job availability in sectors that are not typically unionized. Additionally, some scholars like Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson argue that union decline is due to an influx of corporate donations that influenced policymakers to oppose pro-union reforms of labor laws in the 1970s. In the research conducted by Western and Rosenfeld, they studied the impact of deunionization while also investigating whether unions affect non-union wages. In evaluating the current population survey, they found that deunionization only accounts for a fifth of the increase in the wage inequality for men and none for women. However, after taking into consideration the effect of unions on non-union wages, the research shows that union decline has caused inequality for the women to increase by a fifth and a third for men. The trends present in wage inequality tend to be changes in the top and bottom parts of the wage distribution. More recently, the changes in the wage distribution are due to the increase in wages of workers with the highest incomes. For example, scholar James DiNardo found that deunionization is linked to a third of the increase in the wage gap between median age and the 90th percentile. As union membership has declined due to economic and political reasons, wage inequality has significantly increased, disadvantaging both union and non-union workers while benefiting the wealthy elite. Union decline facilitates poverty by weakening the pathways to economic security and increasing income inequality that widens the gap between the rich and the poor. Because unions reduce the likelihood of poverty-inducing events like pay cuts and injuries, deunionization could lead workers into poverty. Also, unions serve to help those in working poverty by encouraging economic security and the creation of secure, safe jobs, especially for working families. With union decline, economic security weakens, facilitating further poverty. In her analysis, Dr. Abigail McKnight of the London School of Economics found that social, political, and legal mechanisms contribute to the relationship between income inequality and poverty. Socially, public opinion contributes to the underestimating of the extent of inequality and opinions on success and failure. The political economy is impacted due to the wealthy elite's influence in government policies. American economist Joseph Stiglitz emphasizes the role of wealthy donors to political campaigns and parties that can further a particular political agenda that is not representative of individuals facing poverty. Income inequality also has a connection to the legal system in that it leads to increased crime, especially for those with low opportunity cost. This contributes to increased incarceration rates, harsher sentences, and the shaping of legal policy by the wealthy elite, specifically through funding for legal aid and influencing sentences. Unions also benefit non-union workers because wages are higher when union density is higher. To understand this relationship, scholars Jake Rosenfeld, Patrick Denise, and Jennifer Liard report that for non-union private sector men, weekly wages would be an estimated 5% or $52 higher in 2013 if private sector union density remained at its 1979 level, translating to an annual cost of $2,704. The fact that income inequality leads to poverty is evidence for the impact that the decline in unions has on poverty for both union and non-union workers. While there appears to be a clear connection between the decline in unions and the increase in wage inequality, some scholars argue that high levels of unionization may cause more harm than good for workers. For example, Western and Rosenfeld introduced the argument of the spillover effect in their article, meaning employers may reduce union employment after unions force a wage increase. Especially with the alternatives of automation and outsourcing, corporations may decide to decrease the number of employees to meet the new wage standard. This may force former employees to spill over into the non-union sector for employment, resulting in lower wages. However, this theory is not strongly supported by empirical evidence. While corporations have been consistently moving towards automation and the outsourcing of labor, research clearly shows that non-union wages are improved by a strong union presence. For example, Rosenfeld, Denise, and Liard report that for non-union private sector men without a bachelor's degree or more education, weekly wages would be an estimated 8% or $58 higher in 2013 if the union density remained at its 1979 levels, translating to an annual wage loss of $3,016. Therefore, while the number of jobs within the highly unionized sector may decrease, trends of organized labor tend to increase wages for non-union workers. Additionally, unions uphold the idea of a moral economy that implement ethics into the labor force by instituting a standard rate for low-paid workers and the checking of earnings of management. According to Western and Rosenfeld, the moral economy consists of norms prescribing fair distribution that is instituted in market rules and customs. The moral argument implied by the phrase moral economy can be defended by John Rawls' veil of ignorance, that the principles of a just economy are the principles that a rational person would accept behind a veil of ignorance. By implementing a moral economy, the two principles of liberty and difference can be upheld. Therefore, the decline of union leads to the erosion of the moral economy. This affects all workers because unions are the major voices for equity within the workforce. As a result of union decline, Western and Rosenfeld calculate that it is responsible for a fifth of the increase in wage inequality. Across the world, and specifically within the United States, unions promoted fairness and equity in the labor market that extended beyond their own membership. Therefore, with the decline of unions, Richard Freeman in America Works writes that managers of non-union firms who once felt that they had to mimic union wage settlements to remain non-union no longer fear organizing drives. The erosion of the moral economy and the resulting increase in inequality illustrate the need for unions within today's labor market. By analyzing the trends of union decline and increasing wage inequality, the negative relationship between the two variables shows the extent of the impact on poverty. By encouraging the increase in union membership, norms of equity can be reintroduced within the labor market through unions' political, economic, social, and legal effects, reducing poverty and inequality of low-paid workers.